Hello, my name is Dominic Underhall-House and welcome to another episode of Moonbreaker. Today we are looking at a beginner's guide to painting. So it's something that is quite an intimidating part of the game if you don't feel comfortable with it, but there's actually no need to feel worried. If you're a beginner painter, you're new to the game, you want to get a hang of how things work, you're welcome to look to another novice, me, to show you how it's done. So what I'm going to do in this video is show you first of all a few different paint jobs, then I'm going to show you a few of the tools you can use to get to that point, and also to bear in mind that I'm very bad at painting, I'm bad at art in real life. I've got some Warhammer models, I'm only happy with about how one of them looks out of 1.5 armies, so don't worry if you don't feel like you've got that natural artistic talent. The game controls really do help you make up for that. So the first thing I want to do is show you just a couple of things to give you an idea. Now, to give you an idea of the tools in the game and show you how good they are, every single base model in the game was painted using the in-game tools. So we've got things like the Novian Bulwark, so if you look at this, it's quite like a mechanical model, but everything like these little highlights on the corners, the little glowing parts, all of this was done using the same tools that you've got access to. And then we can look at something with a bit more sort of biological hint, like Quetzali, and all of this detail here as well was done using exactly the same tools that you have. Now, what you can do when you come to paint it is you can go for simple things. For instance, this model here, my Axial Pyro, when I unlocked the glowing paints and the metallic paints, I wanted to be able to show people what the paints looked like without having to put too much effort in, and I did this entire model in probably about 3 minutes. Now, it's not the best, it could do some work, it could do some like washing and highlighting and toning it down a little bit, it's a bit too bright, but you can pick out those block colours and make good use of it quickly. Whereas my two most detailed units, first of all we've got my Savria, sorry, after watching the new audio drama. So Savria, I drew all of this on by hand. It's like 3 layers of paint. We've got metallic paints on here with other effects on top to make them look a little bit more weathered. We've got a glowing tip to the staff. This in itself took me about 7 hours, but you've got to bear in mind is a lot of this was trial and error and practice and figuring out how to get things to work. One of the ones I've spent less time on so far, but is a work in progress, this is my Pride Flag Extilior. So I've been working on using the colours of the Pride Flag in the treads, obviously got the rainbow coloured weaponry here, I've got the Pride Flag on his gauntlet, and this has been a longer process, but only because I've been doing this at a slow pace. So this is something that I'm part way through doing. I'm looking forward to sort of seeing how that works in the future. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you just a couple of the basics to how things go forwards from here. So I haven't actually decided which model we're going to pick yet, just to make this a little bit more sort of authentic if you haven't chosen what you want to do. So I'm going to scroll through and I think I'm going to pick... Let's do Florio Lancer. So Florio has a good mix of different sort of parts to the model. It's got a person and a machine. It's a pretty difficult, looking model. It looks like it's going to have a lot of depth, but I can show you how all the different tools can make this a lot of an easier experience. So initially we've got the default paint job, which is this, which is what you get when you start the game. We've got the Gloomside paint job here, which is something you unlock through the season track, but we're going to start with a brand new paint job. So I've not decided anything here whatsoever, which is exactly the point of this. I want to create something completely out of the blue. So this is what happens when you get a base model. You've got all of these details here, and I want to choose a colour scheme. So I've already got some things done in the sun colour scheme. I've got things done in the sea. I haven't much got things done in the life one, but I quite like the look of this flora. So I like the idea of sort of a purple, cream, that sort of colour for a Florio Lancer. So what I'm going to do before anything else is pick what colour I want to be the base and what colour I want to do sort of the accents on. And I like the idea of sort of a pinky style base to it. So I'm going to start with the cheerleader and see if that's what I want. And what we're on here is the regular paint. So regular paint mode, and over here we've got a couple of tools. So this here is to change your brush size, and this here is to change change the opacity of the paint, so how clear it is. So if you put it at 1%, you'll barely see any of it on the model whatsoever. And if you put it at 100%, it will cover absolutely everything. So the first thing that I do with almost any model is zoom all the way out, put the brush on as big as possible, and I just cover the entire thing with a base coat. So this brush is basically orb shaped. It's not actually flat circle like we'd see, it's orb shaped. So as you do it all, it covers the entire model. So every single part of that is now done. Now this obviously doesn't look great, but we've decided already that we want to do a couple of different colours. And there's some really interesting tricks you can do here. So I'm going to start by looking at, say, the sun side. And one of the things that you need to know is there is a shift key. So it's this auto masking tool here. So if you hold the shift key and pick part of the model, say if we pick this part of the sort of the machine here, and see how much of this is considered to be the same part of the model. And what that does is every single part of the model that's coded as being the same material as that will all get coloured at once. So already, we've not really done more than a few seconds, and I think this is a quite nice looking machine. I genuinely do think that's a really nice look here already, but maybe that cream colour's a little bit too bright. So if I want to, you can Control Z or hit the undo key and just remove the entire thing. Click Baron and do exactly the same thing again. Colour it all in, and now we should have covered all of the exact same parts with a slightly more toned down colour, and honestly I prefer how that looks, so we're going to stick with that for now. Now all in all, I think that's a great start. I think that looks really nice, but we've got the whole Florio himself to deal with as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick a few things that accentuate or sort of go along with these colours. I actually quite like sticking to the pre-made palettes, because as a beginner, someone like me who doesn't really know what they're doing, this can really help. But there's a few things in here that we maybe want to do differently. So I like the idea of his armour and his clothes following a similar pattern to his vehicle, but maybe go for different colours on it. So if we click the sun sail and click here, let's see what this does. So to me, that stands out a little bit more. It's a little bit more obvious, but I think I don't really like how it looks. It's not really done the right thing for me. It's not really sort of matched what I want. Let's just try different parts of his outfit and see which are, masked together. I don't hate it, but it's not quite right. So I'm going to undo both of those. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to try going back to the Baron colour. And I kind of liked how it looked on the chest plate. So I'm going to do the chest plate here and just fill that in. And I think to me, that's the right look for that. Now obviously we know that the gloves and the helmet were going to be put together, so we have to think about what we want for that. Now, I don't mind the idea of a more pale colour, but we don't currently have one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the cheerleader colour here, and I'm going to take the Baron colour that we've been using, and you can actually mix them together. So you can swirl them around like this. I think that's a bit too light, so we want a bit more cheerleader. And just every time you click, it'll add a little more in. And there we go. So I think around this is the sort of colour that we want. Maybe this exists in here already, maybe it doesn't. But then what you can do is you can use the colour picker here, and the colour picker here, or you just hold Alt and click, and you can drag it around until you see the exact shade of colour that you want. I want to try one here that's sort of like almost a greyish colour. So it's like a greyish pink. And then I'm going to hold the Shift key again and paint those same parts of the model. So that I think looks a bit nicer. I actually don't hate that. It's not the worst thing I've seen. It's pretty reasonable there. And then I actually think looking at the cloak, I think the cloak could be doing with one of these more rich colours here. So let's try the sun sail here and hold it on the cloak and make it look a little bit more like real fur. So again, we've held the Shift key, we've clicked a few things, it's covered the underside as well. I don't think that's a bad start at all. Now next, these bits of metal here have been coloured the same colour as all of these. But what if we decided that's not what we wanted? What if we decided we wanted something a little bit different? Then all you need to do is pick your metal, so let's go for the bronze here. We can shrink our brush down to make sure it doesn't hit any of the other parts that are masked the same, and just draw just over these, maybe do a belt buckle as well. And so we've got a couple of the metal pieces there, all fitting together. You can actually see here we've missed a part of the cloak under here. So again, if we hold Alt, click on the coat, we can actually colour these pieces in without having to go back to the palette, find the right colour or anything like that as well. So lots of nice little tools there for that front. Now we've got things like the coat, the boots and all that sort of thing. Now I wouldn't be surprised to find if the boots were masked the same as these, so I actually want to colour the boots in that colour. I want to keep the theme the same between his different pieces of armour. And we'll just come around here to make sure we're getting all the different angles, because otherwise we might miss a little bit. And I think that is quite a good look so far. I'm happy with that. We've got a few dark bits they could do with lightening up to match the rest of the scheme, but we'll get to that in a moment. Now so far we've only looked at the paintbrush, which is obviously a paintbrush, but there are lots of different modes in this to look at as well. So one of the next ones we can look at is a wash. Now what the washes do is they pick out the recessed areas, so each of the models is sort of, got a bit of depth to it, and the washes pick out the recessed areas and they sort of put a little bit of whatever colour you're washing in there as well. So what I like to do, even though we're using sort of the Flora set, I like to use a darker colour for the washes because I think it brings out a bit of depth, and my go-to is to use the backfire. So if I go to the backfire, make it quite big and say we want to wash the entire thing, just do the wash over here, and as you can see, this is way too much. It's covered a lot of it, it's made it dirty, it's ruined our entire paint job on our actual Florio, and some parts have changed colour completely. So what we want to do there is undo it, go to the opacity slider. So this makes things more or less clear. So we're going to bring this all the way down. My standard is about 30%. And then if we do the same again, we just run it over a little bit further. And it may not look like we're doing much at the moment. And it really doesn't sometimes, so don't worry if it doesn't look like it while you're doing it. But especially with the cloak. There we go. So that's added a lot more depth in there. And it's not perfect, but we're not going for perfect in this. We're just going for looking reasonable fairly quickly. And I think it may be slightly too much on the coat. So we can just edit that and go back over. I actually haven't changed it back to paintbrush, so go over the coat again to take some of it off the coat. But other than that, all the rest of it has kept that wash in there. And it's added that little bit of depth to it. It looks a little bit more deep in colour. It looks a bit more rich. And I think it brings out a little bit more makes it a little bit more obvious, especially in the helmet and the gloves. But what you'll notice is that it doesn't still really stand out that much. It's got a bit more depth to it, but it doesn't really pop. So what I also like to do, especially on things like this, you can tell by the way I'm also just using the WASD keys to move around here. You can also use the middle mouse button to move, and you can use the right mouse button to rotate. And then what I'm going to do though is I'm going to grab a lighter colour. So on these, I'd probably normally do a whitish sort of colour, but because we're going for this colour scheme here, I'm going to find our Flora, I'm going to pick the same Baron, and I'm going to dry brush. So what dry brush does is almost the opposite to the wash. The wash picks out the recessed areas like these lines on the inside here and gives them a bit of an accent to that, whereas the dry brush picks the raised areas. And so I like doing dark washes and light dry brushes, but there's people who know a lot better than me who will tell you to do far different things. And if we just go and do, I'm going to hold the shift key here, do a little bit of dry brushing on each of these, you'll start to see that it really brings out all the detail. So if we compare this to what it looked a second ago, so we're just going to undo twice, well, a few times rather, just to get back to where we were. So this is what it looked like previously, and this is what it looks like now, and I think that's a much more defined feature there as well. So you can do the same with the cloak, and again I'm going to hold shift on these, and what I find is that with a dark wash and a light dry brush, I tend to think these coats look really nice. So I think that again, it doesn't look like much when you're doing it, but if you go back and then forward, you can see the difference in how the detail on it, especially if you look around here. So it doesn't look particularly detailed there, and it just adds a lot more depth into it, and again, it looks almost a bit more realistic throughout. So I think that's been a really good start to this as well, and we've got a few other things that we can test out. Now, we still need to do the dry brushing on our shins, so we'll just finish that out first. We can do both of these from this side, and we'll do them from the other side as well, just to make sure. And the more you go over it with a low opacity paint, the thicker the paint goes on. So it will look more and more planted on the more you do it. So it's just like painting really, the more layers, the more paint. So the next thing we've got to look at is airbrushing. Now there's a few things that airbrushing is really useful for. Mostly is, partly is because it's directional. So for instance, if I use the airbrush and we pick, say, the glowing paints, so we're going to explain why the glowing paints in a minute. If I just put the glowing paint straight onto the front of Florio's head here, in fact if I do that, just go for, airbrush but with full opacity. If I do that straight onto the front of his face, we now look we've got a glowing head, but there's nothing from the back at all, so it's actually directional. It will only go on from the angle that you press it. And as much as I like the idea that he's just looking into the sun and can't see anything, he does tend to hit most of his shots because it's an ability, so we'll leave that off for now. What I do like doing with this, shrinking the brush size down a bit, till it's just slightly bigger than the end of barrels for things, and then using that to airbrush the barrels. And what I think, for me personally, I think that gives it a little bit of a, almost like a realistic, or like an action that they are firing weapons. They're not just there for decorative purposes. And as you can see, it's only on the front and the side, and it generates a bit of light around it, which is really nice as well. And then we've got a few other things that we could use it on as well. So one other thing that I think is quite nice, which I would do briefly, but we will be undoing it in a second. Say if you go full opacity, full size, zoom out, and you just airbrush the entire side of this model. Nothing else at all, just airbrush that. You then switch over here, pick another colour, airbrush that side, then zoom in on the front, pick a third colour, we'll go for like a pink this time, airbrush that, and a last one from the back. Just go for like a light blue here. It almost gives like a pearlescent effect, which is a really cool use of the airbrushes here. So I saw someone do this and I managed to figure out what they were doing, but I absolutely love how that looks on some models, on some parts of them at least, especially on the machine-based ones. I think it looks beautiful. But that's just another little tool. That took seconds. We didn't even pick any particular colours, we just did what we felt like, and it came out looking quite nice. So absolutely good uses for these as well. Now the next one is the stipple tool. So what the stipple tool essentially is, if we just lower the brush size slightly, and we'll pick black just to demonstrate here, is it's just a series of small dots. So you can see this going on here, and it doesn't look like that much. Here it just looks a bit dirty, but actually what it's really useful for is exactly that, making things look a bit dirty. So here we've gone with a bronze paint onto this for the belt, and what we can do is we can pop down here and find the copper non-metallic palette, which you will unlock very early on in the season pass. I like putting it down to a small brush size for this, still holding the shift key, and just going over these with a bit of the stipple effect. In fact, what I'll do first, just to demonstrate again, I will make these copper again first, because it looks like the washer's taking a bit of that vibrancy away, and this helps demonstrate the tool a little bit better. Oh, we're on stipple, oops. So let's get these fully vibrant and shiny again, and then we'll go back to stipple, pick the non-metallic copper, there we go, elemental, small brush size, and if we just stipple over this slowly. Now we don't want loads, you want it to be, like I said, small brush size for a reason, because two larger pieces of stippling start to look a little bit odd. But you see there we're starting to get a bit of colour coming on, and this does take a little bit of time to get there. But what I tend to think is that if we put this on, say, 2 of these, and then not on the others, it doesn't take away from all of the shine. You still have some of that shine there from the actual design of it, and it's exactly what we wanted the copper for. But now, when you sort of zoom out a little, these two look a bit more realistic, whereas these two look a bit bright. They almost look out of place with the rest of the model, because the rest of the model isn't that shiny. So this is just personal preference, you don't have to do that. There's some models where I've kept the metallic paint exactly as it is, but I think a wash or a stipple effect over the top or something like that is a really nice way to add a bit of depth of colour to it, and just sort of bring it back in line with the other things in the model, so it doesn't look out of place. Now the last thing that's a really useful tool here is things like decals. So what we can do with the decals is you can just choose what you want. My favourite set of these, so you unlock a lot of these through the season pass as well, but some you'll get already. But my favourite set of these is the damage ones. So for instance, if we take the shots, move them over here, what we can do is when you've got it somewhere that you're happy with, you can expand it, you can shrink it, you can rotate it, however you want. And if we just move it, say, over here a little, just press the tick, go back to paint, we've now got some bullet holes in our tank. And honestly, the damage ones look quite good. You can go back, you can choose like a breach effect, so if we bring that to this side, or maybe just down here, maybe there's a scattervine clawing at the bottom of us a little while ago, but I think the scattervine would slice diagonally. So let's pop that here, press the tick, move it back, and it essentially works just like paint. So you can paint over the top of it, you can replace it quite easily, but you can get a nice little bit of ward effect onto there. You can do different different faction branding and that sort of thing, and it's really easy to come up with a few nice uses for this, just to give it a little bit of personality. You can just really make it your own however you want to. Now in terms of finishing touches for this, there's a couple of things that I'd want to do still. So one of them is going to be, I'm going to go for another dry brush, and I'm going to do this just over the jacket. I'll probably do this slightly lower opacity, maybe 20, just to give the jacket a little bit of depth in there as well, because it currently looks a bit dark, not really much personality there. There we go. And then a couple of other things is I'm going to choose a brown and choose higher, get no opacity and just fill the belt in here. I also think as well, I'm not going to do it now, but the stipple effect is really good for making belts and leather and things like that look a little bit more natural. And then for the same reason, let's do these straps. And then maybe just a different colour on the boot as well. So we could go for, say, stonework. And yeah, this is different, but I don't mind the boots being a slightly different colour. Maybe that's a bit too green for what I was hoping for, so what about the brass? How does that look? Yeah, so a bit browny, still a bit leathery. Like I said, you can stipple effect these if you want to. What I will do is just give it a quick wash with the backfire, because again, this is an effect that I think I really like on different things. Makes it look a little bit more, realistic rather than just blocks of colour. And pulling out here, we've got a very nice looking Florio. The last couple of things I like to do is with some of these machinery pieces, I quite like the idea of dry brushing metallic colours onto them, so you can just run over it really lightly, just not too much. It gives it a bit more of that metal look. We didn't actually hold shift here on purpose, because a lot of the model is fine with just having a bit of this on it. We're not trying to avoid spilling over the lines or anything like that. We're just going to go for a lot of these sort of underside machine parts with a bit of that metallic look there as well. We could do the little base platform actually, so let's just do a bit of that as well. Give it that metallic feel. I don't think it needs it on the front. I quite like the front looking fairly clean apart from the injuries. And then the very last thing that I like to do is just these little wires and cables under here. So for some reason, I don't know why, this is just personal preference, I really enjoy doing these like a glowing colour and then just toning it down slightly. I like the idea that their energy glows in the reaches. It's sort of a stylistic choice for me as far as I'm concerned. I usually do then, again, wash it with something, probably just go for like soot in this case, to try and make it look a little bit less intense. Because as much as I like the glowing colours, I don't want it to look so bright that we're at a neon rave. It just needs to be a power source, not a party. So tone these down a little bit. We've still got that glowing effect. And this is going to be my finished version of Florio Lancer. So hopefully this has given you a good idea of some of the tools. And as you get used to it, this didn't take us very long at all. So this paint job has been about 15-20 minutes. It's something you can do a lot quicker if you're not trying to go through all the details at the time, but I'm quite happy with how it looks. We've stuck to our colour scheme, we've got some details in there. You can even go as far as sort of zooming all the way in with the middle mouse button, painting the eyes if you wanted to, go for more colours on it, but this is just an idea of how you can get a really nice looking model without too much of a time sink whatsoever. And as you get used to it, more importantly, the thing to get useful are the controls. So, the painting controls have a lot of shortcuts. I don't use many of them at the moment. I've started to. I think they're fantastic. You should be using these. It'll speed up your painting time so much. But we've got things like rotate, pan, center camera, but the important one, so shift for the auto mask, or shift A to toggle it. Eyedropper, which is one I used in this video as well, to just pick up a paint that you've already used and use it again somewhere else. Bliss mode is one that I'll show you in a moment, and it's if once you've got all the hang of all the controls, or you just want to have a really good look at your model, Bliss mode takes away the UI, so you can look at it in real detail. We've got obviously undo and redo, you can change your brush sizes, your opacity, the brush hardness, loads of different things you can do here as well. So the last thing I'll show you is Bliss mode, so you just press tab, or I believe it's this one here, and now you can really just admire your model in all its glory. So really happy with how this looks. I'm hoping to run a few more Florio lists in the future anyway, and this has been a pretty quick way of putting it forward, so hopefully this has been helpful to you. You can rename your paint job up here, and either when you leave or go to create a duplicate, it will ask you to save it. So we'll just go Florio Flora, because Flora was the palette that we used, and we'll just duplicate the paint job, save this one, and then what you can do is if you're wanting to try something out, we'll save both of these, and this way we can still have this one, we can do tests on this one and try out what we want to figure out a new paint job from there. The last thing I'd say is there's now this button here, and what this does is it opens up a browser with a link that you can share to anyone. They don't even have to have Moonbreaker, and it comes up with a 3D rotatable model of your paint job, so you can really show it off to people and show everyone all the effort that you've put in to making something look spectacular. I've used it. I used it to show off to, and if there's other people doing sponsored streams and people want to know about the painting tools, I show them some of the things that I've done to give them an idea that someone like me with no real painting skill whatsoever can make a half decent looking model, and you absolutely can too. I want to thank you all for watching. Please hit the subscribe button if you enjoyed this content, if you want to see more things like it. Make sure you comment anything you think, anything I've missed, anything that you think would be really helpful to you. Hit the like button, and most importantly, have a good day.